Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at a second submission by Tine and her horse Hallmar. And I must say you've made great improvements. It's been 3 months since we saw the last videotape, but now we are really getting this horse into a really good stretch as we go on here, and even starting to see that same work beginning to happen in the riding work for you. So very good job here. You can see how much deeper he's starting to stretch. And once again, notice as he stretches down, look how the back end starts to move, how much more active the step is. And of course, that's because when the horse gets in this position, it makes it easy for the horse to work its body. In other words, all the parts line up together, so to speak, in there. The machinery inside the body begins to work correctly. So the horse naturally begins to open its stride. Remember, today we see people all the time, we call it cranking and spanking, where they're cranking on one end of the horse and spanking on the other end. Trying to create this idea of collection, meaning they're trying to push the horse together from both ends. And of course, when we do that, we end up just shortening the stride, is what happens to most horses. And if you happen to have one of these $1,000,000 movers like we see in the show ring today, they still look like they have something going on, even though they've been shut down in the same way. But they all end up going lame from that, and it ends up shortening their careers. And of course, they stay a very unpleasant ride because it never gets easier. But you can see how the way this horse is even stretching now, you can see how the walk is becoming more active, the step is coming forward. He gets to a really good place in this stretch, like right there. And notice how he goes down. Look how the walk just takes off. This is a perfect example of that. You can so clearly see as the neck goes down how much easier it is for the rest of the body to operate and swing together, if you will. That is, we're always trying to get the horse to work together. By lifting its back, then we get the two ends to work together. Then the horse can be balanced instead of just shortened. So you've done a really good job here. I like how you're really opening up your own walk here to keep up with him. Now the one thing you are doing is you're keeping the whip in your left hand. Now the whip for the working hand should be in your right hand at this point. So that's something at some point you need to switch and get used to working with the whip in your other hand so that you can get more active work in the lateral movements. And of course begin to control the horse more with the whip where your leg would be. Now where you've got it there is kind of like somebody leading a horse where you can reach behind you and touch the horse, but you can't, it's very hard to do that. You have to swing your arm way out to the outside, or you have to hold it to the inside and try to touch him. So let's try to get that inside hand, let's whip switched over to the right hand here before too long. Really good there. Now look how really deep that's becoming. And these kind of horses that you see, these are fairly straight behind. And the difference that you see when they work correctly and begin to swing, you can really see them beginning to pick up the legs and set them down and really begin to flex the hocks to the degree that you can. For instance, if you tried to, to train this kind of horse in that way of where people are shortening, where they're trying to push the back end and hold the front end and then pull the front end back towards them, you would end up with nothing at all because, once again, these horses are built a little straight behind compared to the modern horses that we see today, so to speak. So you really see the faults in the training in these horses, and you can't be fooled by the extra added movement that they just sort of come with, the way so many of the warm bloods being bred today are. They have so much movement in their hocks, and this is what's fooled a lot of people. So you can see here how you're doing this. We need to get that whip over into your right hand so you can do this in two hands as you work the horse down. But you've worked out a way of doing it for yourself, and once again, now you just need to go back and refine that a little bit. I mean, this is kind of okay for just walking straight down the rail the way you're doing it here, but when we want to ask for more lateral movement, it will be more necessary for you to switch that and have your whip into your left hand there in this particular case. But once again, watch how he goes down, how the walk begins to pick up, begins to swing more actively, and start covering more ground. Remember, at the end of the day, that's what dressage is all about. It's getting the horse to move the most effectively. Imagine, from a time if you actually had to go 25 miles on a horse in a day, you'd want to be moving as efficiently as possible, so you're covering the most ground with the least amount of steps. And any horse that isn't working over its back, the hind end isn't coming through. So that would never be the case. That is, of covering the most ground with the least amount of steps. But you've done a really good job here, and this session today shows a lot more stretch and a lot more activity than we saw the last time. And you can also see how he begins to pull that belly up, and when you get to the trot work, you can see it's still a little dropped right there, but you're going to see that change. So keep your eye on that belly to see how that abdominal wall starts to lift. Now this is a little slow right here, so you don't want to ask him to pick that up. He's stretching down, but you need to ask for a little bit more. And once again, that's why that whip needs to be in your hand so you can touch him where your leg would be instead of more on the shoulder here that you're trying to do here. Because we need that whip behind you. We need it to be where the leg would be to ask the horse to be more active. And there you see what you're trying to do is bring it behind you. That's why you need to get it in that other hand and learn how to do that correctly. So go back and look at my videos if you haven't figured that out, and see if you can't work that whip into the other hand. Once again, you're not doing a bad job, though, considering how you are going about it there. But you see how you have to take that extra effort as you were trying to do there a minute. You have to switch the reins into one hand, then try to reach behind you with the whip. And that's kind of okay if you're just teaching a horse just to lead, but we want to get beyond that just to lead sort of phase. See how here he starts to pick up a little tree, but still pokey. You know, he's stretching down. You just need to be asking for a little more activity there with your whip, and because your whip is not where you can ask for that activity, you're not able to do that. So this is beginning to slow down too much here, and we need to get the whip where you can touch him. And I see you trying to do that. It's just awkward from the way you're trying to go about it. Once again, not bad if all you're doing is walking straight, but as we begin to get him to engage. Remember, the goal of what we're doing here in the work in hand is to teach the horse what it's supposed to do when we ride it. That's why we teach it the work in hand. We teach it to move away from the leg. We teach it to become more active from the leg. All of those things that we need to have the horse to understand once we get on him. And of course, it's much easier. If we've done all this from the ground, then we get on, and it's easy to ride away. If we haven't done anything from the ground, you get on the back of a horse, and it has no idea what you're asking it to do. So we end up with a lot of confusion. And then people start to fight with the young horse, or it doesn't, once again, establishing that idea that the horse will move ahead of that touch along its side, whether it's a leg or the whip, goes a long way to making a horse rideable, since that's what makes them rideable. Without that impulse to move from your leg, then it would be very hard to do anything. In other words, you're kind of like a boat in the stream with no motor. You're just kind of drifting. This is getting better here, though, as you go around here. But once again, it's that same thing of he could just be doing a little bit more, which he kind of did at the beginning. Now, this is a little more regular here, so this is better than it was a moment ago. But still not quite where it could be. I think if you just tapped him a little bit, you'd get a lot more activity, and he's capable of doing it because I've already seen you get him to a better place in the beginning. Once again, here it looks good, but kind of slow. So we're going to touch him and make him a little more active here. But you're certainly getting a lovely deep stretch here. But now you just want to add to that a little more activity so the hind legs even continue to come a little deeper into the body and he becomes more active. Same thing here, because you're not using the whip and you don't have it where you can give him a tap. He's just kind of slowing down when he feels like it. So we want to have the whip where you can just touch it and go. You know, now you're kind of doing the outside rein to the outside. Once again, this is not bad things to experiment with, but I want you to go back and look at some other videos of the work in hand and get that whip over into your right hand. Well, as you see, you know, kind of what you're doing here is kind of like it would be like riding without having your leg, where you can touch the horse, or holding your legs way out from the side of the horses. Actually, people have taught that in certain schools of thought, where you don't touch with the horse the leg at all, which of course doesn't give you any ability to do much with the horse. There, now it starts to speed up. So once again, you can see how he goes down there, you get more activity. So that was all good work in hand, but what I'd like to see you do now is get that work in hand going with the whip in the correct hand so that you can keep it more active when he starts to slow down. And you can respond to that more quickly like you do when you ride. We want to be able to respond as soon as we feel the horse starting to lose impulsion or lose that ability to step forward in tendency. If we want to be right there so we can impulse him and ask that to come forward again. That is, ask those hindquarters to come forward underneath you again. But that was certainly better than the last time I saw it. You got more swing, and the only thing was missing was times it's just not touching enough to get it active enough. But here, even in your walk, this is starting to go quite nicely. It's a little bit slow here. I feel like, once again, same thing here. You could give him a little tap and get a little more, but this is not bad. You're getting a good deep stretch. It just, once he gets to there, now we just need to add a little more activity to that. You're sitting quite nicely in the saddle. Always remember that, when we get in the saddle, it's just like having good posture with a horse between your legs. So if you do a little yoga, the idea of like mountain pose or something like that, where you stand with good posture, with your shoulders back, your chest should be just lightly lifted and your abdominal wall engaged. So that's the one thing I see here is you could just lift your chest a little bit and get the whole body stretched up. Your head is a little bit forward. You could come back on top of your shoulders just a little bit more, and that will help you just to lift your chest up and bring your shoulder blades together behind your back. As you're doing right there. You see, you just improved it yourself right there. Now that started to look better. You lifted yourself up a little bit. But your legs are in a good position, your toes are lifted, and your heels are basically down, so that's all good. Looks good. Basically where you want to be. The saddle you're riding is allowing your leg to hang underneath you pretty well, so that's all good. And that's what a good saddle should do. It should simply allow you to get in it, and it should just allow your leg to hang in the right place. Now, some people, have very shortened calves or something like this where they can't even get their legs down underneath them. But you have nice long legs, and you're getting into a good position underneath the horse. That's where you like to be able to be. Always remember, if you can't get your heel down below the side of the horse, that is when it starts to curve back under again, that it's very dangerous, because if you can't get your leg around the horse, that's part of what keeps us on a horse. So if a horse suddenly leaps up in the air and our legs are draped around the horse, it gives you something to keep you down in the saddle. If you're so short that your legs don't even come halfway down the side of the horse, well, if the horse decides to do a giant leap into the air, you may very well go flying. And that's once again, the reason why we want to keep our legs drooped around the horse. As Mr. Oliveira used to say, it's like your legs should be like wet noodles, just draping around the sides of the horse. So not bad there. The walk work was pretty good. I'd like to see that it got a little more active than it did, but you got him into a good stretch, and it's certainly a big improvement over what we saw. So here in the trot, I'd like to see you kind of like you were just doing in the walk. You could stretch up a little more, try to bring those shoulder blades together behind your back. It's so important that we be in balance above the horse, and that's part of what we do here in learning to ride like this, is it teaches you to balance because you're not holding on. We're always giving to the mouth of the horse to the weight of the rein all the time. So we're not able to balance against our hands, which is what develops the rider's position. And there you get to a really good place. Right there, it starts to swing. So again, I think your shoulders are just over just a little bit. Your chest is just a little bit dropped. You could just lift all that up and bring your shoulder blades together behind your back. But that was much better. And as I said, finding our balance is the first. Before we can start riding the horse, we have to be in balance on top of the horse. So if we're completely out of balance, the best thing you can do is just what you're doing is work on these stretch work, so you're not able to hold on and balance against the mouth of the horse. So the beauty of the classical system, if you will, is that it develops both horses and riders if we bring them along together, because the rider has to learn to balance. So many riders today, you can imagine when you watch some of these riders, you can imagine if you cut the reins, they'd fall backwards off the back of the horse, because they're basically pulling themselves up against the mouth of the horse all the time and bracing. So any trainer that tells you you should have 5 or 10 pounds in your hand when you're riding, well, that's a lot of weight. Go pick up a 5-pound weight sometime and see how much weight that is. That's a lot. If you're holding 5 pounds in your hands, you are balancing against the horse's mouth all of the time. So it's so important. That's beautiful right there. Now that's really looking good and active. Really good right there. Really good. That's exactly what you're looking for. Now see how round the hock movement is. When he gets in that position, you can see how the hocks, once again, if you put a white dot in the middle of the hock, it would almost make a perfect round circle. And that's what I'm always looking for. As I said, what has fooled people today is the way we're breeding horses today. They have such good back ends that even when they're hollow, the hocks look like they're moving. Well, that's just being bred into them, but that's also why they all fall apart at such a young age, because these horses that have so much movement, when they're ridden hollow, they even do more damage to themselves because their own bodies tear themselves apart because they have that ability to have so much more thrust built into those hocks. So as I said, when it isn't done correctly, it's kind of like driving a car with a slightly bent crankshaft or something. Everything else is going to suffer. Now, if you notice as he comes around here now, you see how his abdominal wall has really pulled up now compared to what we saw in the walk. Take a look here. See, there's nothing hanging down there anymore. So that tells us that his core is engaging. He's pulling up through his core. Now, once again, don't be fooled. You know, if you see a horse that is looks like a greyhound behind, that's not a horse. That's a horse that's dehydrated. That's very different. When you see that kind of exaggerated pulled up in the abdominal wall, that's usually a sense of that not enough water in the horse, dehydration, and that's not the same thing as pulling up through the back. But this is really nice through here. Excellent work right here. If you can get this much work, this horse is going to be developed beautifully, and it's wonderful because these kind of horses, these steward horses, and these various sort of cold-blooded riding horses that we see a lot of in Sweden and Norway, these places, they're wonderful stout horses, and it's amazing to watch them change because they look like plow horses until you get them working. And we said someone posted us a couple of pictures of one the other day that they've been working in, how completely fit it was, and they really turn into something beautiful. But they quickly turn back to being sort of little plow horse looking things, if you will. But look how fit they can be. And obviously, they race a lot of these horses. They have on carriage racing and this sort of thing, and they have to be fit to do that. It's just that they're kind of what we call a medium blood horse or something, a bit cold-blooded. And they turn back to fat very quickly, it would seem. And once again, it's that issue of how they're built. Now, you see this horse. Look how much movement you have in this horse now. If this horse were not over its back, it would look like a little trot pony. In other words, you would see no flexion in the hocks at all. And a lot of big horses, like Amber's horse, for instance, Legolas is pretty straight behind, relatively speaking, compared to the modern horse, if you will. So we have to do a lot of that work. So these kind of horses that have those straight hocks, we have to stretch them even more, So every horse is a little bit different, and we work it to where it can get over its back. And if you have one of these fabulous movers, so to speak, they'll come up a little sooner and able to maintain a little more action in the hock and up through the back. So the horses, the straighter they are behind, the more time you have to spend in that stretch to really, once again, you could see with this horse how it really looked nice. Now, this is not a bad canter. He's just a little bit, got the neck up a little higher than I want, but there you go, right there. Now he's working over his back. So that's really quite a good canter. You're doing a really great job here. And that shows us if he has that good a canter, he's ready to start doing some canter. And of course, the canter does help the horse build muscle. Don't forget that too. But if you canter too soon, it will just wreck the horse's legs. So once we can get a good canter, and once again, look at the activity that you created there, and that was partly created by doing the canter. But once again, if you cantered, even if you just canter a little bit, sometimes it'll kind of wake them up a little bit for these kind of horses, and they'll get a little more action. But if we did a lot of it upside down, you'd end up with a lame horse or one with a sore back, especially if we're sitting on top of them. And if the horse is not over its back when you canter, you do want to get a little more in a two-point position. You want to get your weight in your heels and get off the horse's back a little bit, because we don't want to sit on a hollow horse ever, whether it's in the trot or the canter. So you're doing quite a good job here. This side isn't quite as good as the other side got to. You can see how he's a little bit higher up here in the canter. But even that is not bad. It's not so bad I'd say don't do it. I'd say you can easily start adding some canter into your works now. Maybe not every day, but certainly will be at the point where it can do every day. There he goes. Now he's starting to reach forward into it. So that's really good. So you've done a great job here in 3 months' time. I thought you brought this horse a long, long way. Look at the action in the hocks now. Now there's what you're looking for. Now this horse is working over its back and it's really going to build some top line. So great job here. Now look at the walk you have now. That's where we want to see the walk. That's really good work. So keep up the great work. Look forward to seeing this one again. This is Will Faerber with our good friend Tine and Hallmar here.